Hey everybody, in my previous video of this laptop where I installed Windows 11 on it, I got a request to put Windows Vista Home Premium on this laptop. Windows Vista Home Premium was what this thing originally came with, and I thought it actually wouldn't be a bad idea to see how it runs with a solid state drive and 4 gigs of RAM with Windows Vista Home Premium. And of course this laptop originally had a hard disk drive, can't remember what size it was, and it only had 2 gigs of RAM. So back in the day when I had Windows Vista Home Premium, I can imagine it was a bit slow. So that being said, the first thing we gotta do is, I don't know when this DVD drive was last cleaned, if ever. So we're gonna pop in our laser lens cleaner CD, especially an audio CD that has a little set of bristles on the back of it. And what these do is they run across the laser lens to clean off dust that may have accumulated over time, because what can happen is when that dust gets on there, it will affect the drive performance and sometimes stop it from working altogether. So the faceplate is missing off of the drive, so it was a little difficult to get that button pressed and make this thing up and up. Now of course I could use eject from within Windows. But the way this works is it plays like an audio CD. Let's see if it can even detect our DVD drive. Okay, there we are. So what I'm going to do is we're going to play this with Windows Media Player. So the way it works is it actually gives you directions. So I'm going to skip the instructions. We're just going to go to cleaning. We just skip the track 4.
The laser lens cleaning process is now concluded.
And what I do is I go back and forth a couple of times.
The laser lens cleaning process is now concluded.
So more or less tracks 2 and 3, they are just, you don't play these tracks, you just go across them. And what that does is the laser lens moves across the area of the CD where the little bristles are. Therefore it helps to clean the lens. Alright, with that being out of the way, let's get started with the exciting stuff. Yeah, this freaking drive, the little button on the front is hard to use because the faceplate's missing, so we're going to eject it this way. There. Done deal. Alright, so it's definitely been a minute since I pulled this out. And what's funny is it's got my name on it, and the reason why was back in 2014 I briefly worked at Staples as an Easy Tech associate, and they didn't have half the installers for like Windows Vista and Windows 7. So you know what I did? I loaned them mine. I would bring mine in to the store and let them use my Windows Vista DVD. So yeah, that's pretty crazy. And I certainly hope that good old Staples, hopefully they have it more figured out now and have the installers that we need for, of course, Windows 10, Windows 11, which of course I should note that Windows 10, Windows 11, you can simply get the installers off the internet using the media creation tool, so we don't rely on DVDs nearly as much. But look at that. Look at that beautiful thing right there. Golly, I miss this. I miss these days where you would purchase a copy of Windows and you would get physical media. Now, I think it's still the case with certain like OEM copies, but it's been a long time since I've actually gotten one. But yeah, the beautiful Windows Vista Home Premium DVD. Now, of course, this one is 64-bit, so back in the day, to get 32-bit, I had to go online and I probably use a torrent or something, I'll admit, to get this ISO image to write this DVD for 32-bit Vista. Now, since we have 4 gigabytes of RAM in this system, we're going to be installing Windows Vista 64-bit. So we're going to pop this in there. And since we don't need this installation on Windows 11 anymore, we'll take a shortcut. Jeez. This brings back memories. Crazy to think how long it's been since I have installed Windows using the DVD. I mean, since Windows 10, we've used flash drives. And of course, I hardly ever dealt with Windows 8, although on occasion I would install Windows 8 or 8.1 when servicing a computer. But yeah, it's crazy how things have changed. Feeling a lot of nostalgia right now. Okay, here we are in the Windows Vista setup utility. So Windows Vista, if I recall correctly, it was the first version of Windows to use this graphical installer. And of course, Windows XP, you started out with a text-based installer. And of course, I had plenty of videos on this channel from way back in the day of installing Windows XP. And in fact, I'll include a link in the corner or in the description to one of the videos. But more or less, the installer that you have used to install Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, Windows 10, and earlier builds of Windows 11 was based heavily off of this Windows pre-installation environment here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to skip installing or inserting the key. And to just say no. And then you'll select the version of Windows you're installing, which in this case is Home Premium, and you'll say you'll check the box. I have selected the edition of Windows I have purchased. Accept the license terms. Choose custom. This is probably more familiar. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe our drive, or at least delete the partitions that are there. Now the thing about Windows Vista, if I'm correct, is Windows Vista does not include out of the box native support for solid state drives. I mean, you can install it on a solid state disk. I've done it before. However, it does not by default have the trim function built in, which is, I guess we can say, more or less the defrag of solid state drives. However, this is going to be a temporary install, so I'm not really worried about it. So we'll let this install. Okay, so here we are at this setup window screen. So we'll go ahead and put in a name. Not gonna bother with the password. Select next. And what I like about Vista, for example, is it allows you to name the computer first thing in setup. We'll just call this thing Vaio. Why not? And I always used to pick either this background or sometimes that background. But this background here was my favorite. See, what I like about Vista is that right out of the box, you're basically doing customization. Now, of course, they changed this in Windows 7. Let's say ask me later on that. And set the date and time. Come on, Microsoft. Can you not seem to figure out that this is important? I mean, why can't Windows 10 and Windows 11 and Windows 8 ask this important question? It blows my mind. So it looks like we have a network connection. We were prompted to select our network location. That's good news. So one thing that Vista, and I believe 7 does this too, just in a different area or different time, is it runs basically what's called WinSat, where it assesses your computer's performance. And honestly, I feel like this is a complete waste of time, because 9 times out of 10, the computer's going to be missing drivers, including the driver for the graphics. So the graphics will usually get a 1.0 because it's missing the proper driver. So it's like, why does it even do this? In here you basically get these little things telling you what you can do with Windows Vista. Basically, it's really similar to what was the Windows XP back in the day during the setup. Y'all probably remember that if you worked on computers with XP back in the day. I'm sure many of you probably have. Now, of course, Windows Vista got a lot of flack over the years. Of course, Vista, when it was released, had a lot of issues with bugs and drivers not being compatible and stuff like that. Oh yeah, been a while since I've seen that. Now Vista had a lot of its issues fixed by Service Pack 1, and by the time Service Pack 2 came out, yes, that was the second Service Pack, it was a pretty decent operating system. And of course, later that year, 2009, after Service Pack 2 was released, Windows 7 came out. But here we are at the desktop, and I'm telling you, this is, oh man, brings back memories right here. You get this little welcome center on the first start. And it's funny, the first time it loads up, you don't get the little checkbox to disable it from popping up. That comes on the second startup. But look here at that beautiful desktop background and this sidebar. Oh man, take me back to 2007. Jeez. Man, 2007, that was, like for example, spring of 2007, that was my sophomore year of high school. Really takes me back seeing Windows Vista again. Okay, so I just restarted the system, and now we have that little checkbox there to where we could turn this off. And of course, it's the welcome center that pops up in Windows Vista after you first install it. So a couple of things, I've taken care of the activation off camera, so that's out of the way. And I was having a troubleshooting issue with accessing my network share. And what's funny is when I go to access it, you get this prompt here. Now typically in newer versions of Windows, like Windows 7 and later, once you put in the login credentials for the network share and you check the option to remember the credentials, it saves them to the Windows Credential Manager. But we're dealing with Windows Vista, and that option isn't really available in the Home Premium version. So what I'm having to do is I end up having to copy all my files over to a USB flash drive. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and install Windows Vista Service Pack 2. So here is our install for Service Pack 2. Man, it's been a long time since I have ran this. And of course I got the lovely as ever user account control. Matter of fact, before I do anything else, let's go ahead and turn that off. Because unlike in newer versions of Windows where you can throttle down its functionality, Vista you can only have it either full on or full off. So, and of course here we're in the control panel, and this control panel reminds me very much of the Windows XP control panel. See, Windows Vista was like that half and half OS. Had a lot of the newer stuff that got rolled into Windows 7, but also had a lot of the older stuff in Windows XP if you think about it. So, let's go to user accounts and turn user account control on or off. Uncheck that. And you got to restart the computer. So let's go ahead and witness our restart. And before I end this video, I'll do a benchmark of the solid state drive to see how it performs on this system with Windows Vista installed. I don't know about you, I just love watching Windows Vista start up. I mean, every time you had that nice, beautiful Windows orb, as they called it back then. But yeah, the startup animation is another example of half and half between XP and 7. Now, Windows 7, if you install it on a netbook, would run the Vista boot up animation because netbooks did not have the required display resolution, and I think it was 1024 by 768 required to run the Windows 7 startup animation. But anyways, let's go back in here and let's install Service Pack 2. We'll let this run and we'll come back when it's done. And it's funny, and of course now that we turned off UAC, now Windows Vista is nagging us to turn it back on. So we'll go ahead and change the way Security Center alerts me. Say don't notify me and don't display the icon. Bye bye. Now you should note this installer for Service Pack 2 actually had to fetch a download from Microsoft, which surprisingly didn't have any issues. Now, how long that'll be the case remains to be seen, but if for any reason you cannot download Service Pack 2, there is a chance that you'll be able to do it using the steps I'm going to be showing you in just a moment after we finish installing Service Pack 2, and that is Legacy Update. Okay, so Service Pack 2 is now installed. You close that out. So now I'm going to access Legacy Update, and to do that we need to do something kind of sketchy. Open up Internet Explorer. And it's funny, you can't even open the default web page anymore. So we're going to go to legacyupdate.net. I think this is IE7. Okay, so here we're in Legacy Update, and more or less what we need to do is set up Legacy Update. So what we got to do is scroll down, go to Install Legacy Update, save this file, and we'll run it. Now, as you know, I do have another video on Legacy Update, and I'll put a link to it in the upper right corner of this video. So it's pretty straightforward. I think the other video also demonstrates on Windows Vista. So install these components. You'll come back when it's done. So while we're waiting on this to wrap up, I'm going to explain what Legacy Update is. So more or less, Microsoft since they no longer support Windows Vista, also the same as Windows XP, and Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, they no longer have the servers available for many of these operating systems to fetch updates from. So if you go into Windows Update and you try to run and check updates, it won't find updates, or might find very few updates. Basically, the system won't be able to update itself. So Legacy Update, more or less, what they're doing is they're providing the updates to these older versions of Windows. No, this does not necessarily mean that these older versions of Windows are receiving support again. It just more or less allows them to get online, get updates, get drivers that are already available for these systems. So that's more or less what we're doing here. We're doing this to ensure this system has all the updates available installed. And also we're going to be using this to fetch drivers. Okay, so we are back after several restarts. It did a few things, including installing Internet Explorer 9, which is of course still way out of date. I mean, Internet Explorer is no longer supported anyway. So, and still we can't even access this default web page. So more or less the way this works is Legacy Update. It can work in two different ways. It can function as, of course, the web-based update that you would have, like think Windows Update or Microsoft Update on the web in Windows XP. This looks very similar to that. And supposedly also you can use the built-in Windows Update if you're using Vista or later, which we're not going to do that right now. We're just going to rely on the web-based update. And we're going to let this thing fetch the needed updates, so there'll be driver updates and just regular patches and stuff. The idea is to have this thing fully up to date as much as we can to be a good fair test on this system with the upgraded hardware. Okay, so you can see here we have a whole bunch of updates that need to be installed. Almost 200. It's 185 total. And these range from security patches to hot fixes to drivers, all that good stuff. And of course we got the optional ones too. So let's go ahead and select these down here. These drivers, we need to have these drivers. For example, the display driver, and looks like an updated Ethernet controller driver. So we'll go ahead and install these. And there we go. So this will probably take a little while. So we'll come back when it's done. And here we are like 10 hours later, and we are still installing updates. We're currently on update 72 of 187. And here it is a day later, and we are still installing updates. Okay everybody, so it's actually been several days since I had last worked on this thing. As you may have seen in the previous clips, updates took a very long time, and ultimately what happened was it's like the system kind of froze up during the middle of installing updates. And I think it was maxing out the system RAM. I don't know. Hard to say whether it was the fault of Windows Vista or it's the fault of Legacy Update, but you know, I restarted it and it had to sort of recover itself from failed updates. Kind of did it on its own, but I don't know how many updates didn't get installed, but I know we do have a lot of the important ones like the drivers, like the graphics and things like that. So it's going to start this thing up, and let's take a tour through it. Alrighty, so we're at the desktop, and We can see the sidebars loading. That typically takes a little while to load sometimes, but here we are. Now I guess where I left off was I was installing updates and of course running into problems, so what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and install a few different things. Now of course Chrome, we're limited on that due to this being Windows Vista. We'll see what we can get with this installer. I question if the last version of Chrome that was supported on Windows Vista will even support the modern web, really. Yeah, you can see installation failed because your version of Windows is not supported. Alright, let me try my older installer. This one's really old. Now of course it goes on the internet and downloads the latest one it can, but this installer is actually from 2010. We can see it's downloading something. Okay, looks like we're getting somewhere. Now of course I can see we don't currently have the Aeroglass theme yet, so I will need to run WinSat. Oh, yeah, this is a very, very old version of Chrome. Version 49. Yeah, that's quite old. So, fun fact was, Google quit supporting Chrome updates for Vista before Microsoft quit supporting updates for Vista. Yes, more or less around the time, I think 2014, roughly. I'm just trying to guess back. 2014, that was of course the year Windows XP lost support. Around that time, 2014, 2015, roughly, Google stopped supplying updates for Chrome on both XP and Vista. So even though Vista is very similar to Windows 7, so I guess Google considered Vista more similar to Windows XP than they did to Windows 7. I don't know. Of course, Vista didn't have a very big market share, so maybe that was why. But yeah, it's definitely been a while since I've seen Chrome with tabs looking like that. Definitely brings back memories. But let's go ahead and close that out, and let's go ahead and run the Windows Experience Index, or WinSat as I called it a moment ago. That's kind of the short name for it. See what this thing can rate at now. Okay, so I ended up rating this thing as a 3.2. So of course the graphics I figured would be the lowest score in the whole thing due to this being chipset graphics, not the greatest out there. But of course the primary hard disk, well, SSD, is a 5.9. Now, of course, Vista maxed out at 5.9 on this score. Windows 7 raised it to 7.9. I think it was in Windows 8 and 8.1. You could go up to a 9.9. Now, Windows 10, this tool is completely going, or at least the GUI portion of it. I think in the earlier builds of Windows 10, probably like 1507, maybe 1511, you could actually trigger a WinSat assessment, but you wouldn't have this graphical interface. But what was funny was if you could trigger it and you could actually open the Games Explorer, like for example this right here, you would see this down in the corner. You would see the score down in the corner even on, I think, earlier builds of Windows 10. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run a benchmark test of our solid state drive. Yeah, those sequential read and write speeds are not very impressive. And of course, that's not the solid state drive's fault. Apparently that's a fault of this computer, because I know that SSD would be a lot faster in a modern system. But we can see that the random access read speeds are a whole lot faster than you would get with a hard disk drive, especially a 5400 RPM drive like you would originally have in this laptop. So that will explain why the performance is definitely better than it would be with just a hard drive. Now the thing is, Vista, as I think I mentioned earlier in this video, Vista does not natively support solid-state drives. It does not have the integrated trim function. So for example, let's go ahead and hop on our internet real quick. And let's say, for example, SSD trim. Let's see if this even works on this old Chrome. Can we even get on the internet with this browser? Oh, there we are. So this is kind of briefly what SSD trim is. It's kind of like garbage collection, and yeah, I'm gonna say this this version of Chrome is definitely struggling. Yeah, it's definitely struggling with the modern internet. So more or less, you have to download and install a piece of software to manually run trim on your SSD. Now, this is a temporary installation. I'm going to be wiping this probably when I finish this video, so I'm not very concerned about that right now. But again, with this Chrome being so old, Yep, as I figured, this browser, due to its age, it's so old it doesn't support the modern web. So this computer will no longer receive Chrome updates because Windows XP and Windows Vista are no longer supported. Now again, as I mentioned earlier, let me just look this up here. So I wasn't too far off. So yeah, 2016. That was the year that Google Chrome ceased to support both Windows XP and Vista. So if you're running Windows XP, you had about 2 years worth of Chrome support following the end of support date for XP, which I think was April 2014. But yeah, Vista, I guess Google decided, due to Vista having such a small network share or market share, that they would just stop supporting it before Microsoft even quit supporting it. So yeah, there you go. So we're not going to be doing much internet browsing with this. Now of course I did some browsing with Windows 11 on this system in a prior video. But let's go ahead and wrap up by looking at a couple of things in Vista. Yeah, like I say, Vista is kind of like, it's kind of like that half and half between, of course, Windows 7 and Windows XP. You look at the control panel, it very much resembles that of Windows XP. Especially like the classic view. It looks very much like XP. Yeah. And of course, one thing about Vista that I think kind of got overlooked as an operating system was Vista was like the last version of Windows that came fully bundled with software for essential tasks. Like you had a photo gallery, you had a movie maker, which is funny to note. I used the Vista Movie Maker to edit videos for this channel up until, geez, 2021, 2022. I think 2021. Yeah, far too long. I now use VideoPad. But yeah, this is the old Vista Movie Maker, which you can download and install and run on newer versions of Windows, including Windows 11. Not that I would recommend that, because there's definitely a lot more options out there. But yeah, you had a Movie Maker, you had a photo gallery, and of course, Windows Media Player 11. Which, funny note, years ago I managed to actually run Windows Media Player 11 on Windows 7. And I could probably do it on newer versions of Windows if I really wanted to. Yeah. Media Player 11. I tell you what, I just love this Airglass theming of Windows Vista. Now the crazy thing is, the Airglass theme in Windows 7. Now of course this isn't a good example because this computer has pretty weak graphics, but honestly, it seems to me that Vista has smoother Airglass transitioning than 7 did. I think they scaled it back a little bit in 7 to make it run a little faster because it did really use a lot of resources in Vista. But yeah, you got the Windows Media Player looks like a pane of glass. Man, I tell you, just look at this. Just look at the top of the window. Now, of course, we cannot forget about Windows Media Center. In a way, I do think Microsoft made a mistake by killing off support for Media Center. I think they could have modernized this into a newer... Well, I mean, I guess I could say they could have modernized this for streaming, because a lot of us have cut the cord, no longer have cable. They could have modernized this to still be like a media hub for your streaming apps, like streaming YouTube or streaming Netflix, streaming Amazon Prime TV or Prime Video, all that stuff. I mean, they could have kept this going, and I still think it would have had some relevance even today, just in a different way. Yes, Media Center definitely. I really enjoyed it back in the day, but sorry to rush y'all through this, but I need to get this video done. Long overdue. I got other things I need to move on to. But yeah, that is this Sony Vaio laptop. Running Windows Vista Home Premium, the OS it originally came with. Now, of course, we're running it in 64-bit instead of 32-bit. And of course, we're running it with 4 gigs of RAM versus the 2 gigs of RAM it originally had. I think it was 2 gigs. And of course, with the solid-state drive, which should definitely help make a difference there. So, anyways, that wraps it up for this one. Watch it shut down here. Have you enjoyed it? Thanks for watching.